Good afternoon. This is Jim Whitehead of All Power Group. I've done a lot of different things in my life. One of them is becoming a coffee roaster. Thanks to my wife talking me into drinking coffee, and I hadn't for most of my life. It was so good. I get so interested in coffee. It turned into a passion. And I studied every day for a year to absorb everything that I basically could related to coffee. Then it came to the point I was so interested, even though I was in the generator business. I said, I would like to start a coffee roasting business, which in the long run would potentially replace my generator business in the sense of financial. So approximately in 2018, I started Roasting Expectations. The big thing you have to decide when you're going to roast coffee is what type of roaster are you going to use. The two main roasters, one is the drum roaster, which is powered by either typically propane or natural gas. And when you put the coffee into the roaster, the drum, and that's why it's called the drum spins. And with the propane or natural gas, it heats the drum up, the coffee spins, and as the heat goes up, it starts to roast the coffee. Now, roasting is tough because you can either under roast, over roast, roast too quickly, just a lot of variables that can either have it where you end up having a good roast or a bad roast. The other type of roaster, and this is what I ended up doing, is called a fluid bed. Instead of it being with gas and heating up a drum, it basically heats up the air and has it where the air progressively roasts the coffee. Now what you're looking at is the Artesian 3E made by Coffee Crafters, and that's what I chose. It was a good beginning roaster. I could roast anywhere from a very small quantity up to 3 pounds of coffee every 15-minute period. So you could roast, about 12 pounds per hour. Now, when you get into the fluid bed, it is based on air and heat. And this is just showing you the air compressor that was part of this setup, where the air compressor does a couple things. It basically lofts the beans, as you can see in these two pictures. The air is pushing up the coffee, and you're not touching the metal pieces that the roasting is within. It literally is hot air. At the same time as the coffee is heating, the what we call chaff flakes off and has to go somewhere. So the roaster with the air is pushing all the what you don't want out and into a bag that in this case is outside of this building. When you're doing the roasting, you basically find that depending on what type of roast you want to have, either a light roast, a medium roast, or a dark roast, is all based on the amount of time that you're roasting the beans and the heat that the unit gets up to. Now, with this setup that you're looking at, you see the roaster, and a little bit to the left you see the temperature gauges. They would help me decide how long the coffee should stay in the roaster. Typically, you would roast beans, and again, depending on the type of roast, either light, medium, or dark, you would base it on and keep an eye on what the temperatures go up to. Now, this particular roaster had temperature measurements, ambient, meaning the room temperature, because that can affect the roast, believe it or not. Also, the exhaust temperature, the heat or the temperature of the beans, and the temperature around the beans. And what you would be able to do is just go to the extent that you're feeling what type of roast you want and go up to either approximately 420 to 460. Now, one phenomenon that basically happens with beans, they're closed initially. When you get up to what we call, and it's called first crack, and it sounds like a popping noise. It almost sounds like you're popping popcorn. The first crack, you're at least now at a point where the coffee is good, could be good. In this case, it's probably what we would call a light roast. You keep going, you have to really keep an eye on the temperature and the time. And if you're going to go to a higher, in the sense of a dark roast, you're going to go to what we call second crack. And again, that's another point of where the beans are opening up and really getting roasted. And the point, as I said, you decide when to pull the beans, as we call it, and that depends again if you want light, dark, or medium roast. Now you're also seeing on the right hand side, and the blower also pushes air up through a line, and you've transferred the beans from the drum into the cooler, and it forces air up through the beans to cool them relatively quickly. If you just put them out and you didn't run the air through it, believe it or not, they're so hot that they would continue to roast a little bit more. So if you don't cool them down quickly, you will have a roast that you didn't expect. And my preference always was pretty much a medium roast. Occasionally, a customer for the beans would want to have a dark roast, and that's when you're getting into about the 460 range or higher. But what happens when you get into a dark roast, you're getting very close to burning the beans or ruining the beans. And if that's the case, they won't be usable, and you'll have to do the roast over again. So whenever a customer would say, I want a dark roast, I'd be like, this is going to be close, because it's either not dark enough or it's too dark, and you've basically destroyed the beans. So it's that close. It's right on the cliff, if you know what I'm trying to say. Now, when you can see now the end product, and I had a lot of fun getting all the supplies and the process down. The beans I usually used were what we call Arabica. Those are the best beans that are grown at much higher altitudes, 5,000 feet or higher. More expensive, but they have a tendency to taste better. The other bean type is Robusta, and they are a little bit more caffeinated, but they typically have a tendency to be bitter. Bitter. So that's what you have to be careful, especially with the Robusta. Now, again, you're seeing, and these are either 12 ounce or a pound of coffee beans. Now, the last thing I'd like to say is discussing what you do after you've cooled the beans in the tray that I showed you. If you said, well, I'm just going to bag them all up and just sell them to my customers or give them to my customers, they're not ready for consumption. So what we would do is I would be putting, as soon as they cooled, I would put them in a one-way container. When I say one way, the air can only go out, air can't go in. When beans are done roasting, they give off gases, and that's initially why they're not very good for, or can be used for, coffee immediately. You need them to rest for 2 to 4 days. And again, you have them in a container that has a one-way valve. The air, whatever's inside, can get out, but oxygen or air cannot get in. If you left them open, they would basically go bad pretty quickly, because you've got to keep them fresh. So the bottom line, you let them rest for about 3-4 days. Then you put them into the bags like you do here. You seal them, and the bags that you buy have a one-way valve also, so that if there's any further release of gas, the gas has a way of getting out of the bag. But it's a one-way valve, so the oxygen in the air cannot get in and basically spoil the beans. Also, in this picture to the left, you can see one of the many coffee grinders. And the best coffee is they're about 4 days old, and you only grind them when you're basically going to, make a cup of coffee. So you're grinding them at their freshest, best flavor, and then you immediately roast them. So you're getting a very quick process of getting the best taste out of the coffee. Now, coffee doesn't go bad in that you'd say, well, if I don't consume these beans within 2 weeks or so, is that going to be a problem? No, not really, but bottom line, they're not at their freshest state. When you go in the supermarket and you see tons and tons of bags of coffee, and they maybe were roasted 6 months ago, and they were ground and put into the bags, you've already lost a lot of the goodness of those coffee beans. Now, most people say, I don't care, it tastes okay to me. It's just when you find that you're consuming coffee that follows the steps I mentioned in the sense of bagging them, protecting them, and only grinding them at the time of the coffee, being made, that's when you're going to find big difference in the taste of the coffee. So anyway, I've had a lot of fun, and it's just one of the many things I do. And would really love any comments or questions. I like to teach. And again, it took me a good long time to get good at this and make it into a viable business. But anyway, thank you again, and take care.